Welcome to another edition of Minot Matters here at the Dakota. And I'm Jonathan Starr. This episode is brought to you by Shock, Safe, and Lock. Previous this year, we had a legislative session, and big deal in North Dakota. But then after a legislative session, you begin to see some of the actions that were taken actually go into law. And so today we're joined by Senate Majority Leader David Hogue. Thanks for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Feels like we've done this once before, where we did this whole intro thing. I'm sorry, I messed up, so I'll just let everybody know. It happens. But really do appreciate you coming on. And I said this at the first time, but I want to say it again because I think it's good. You're in Minot, and we don't take advantage of this enough. And so I really appreciate that and the support that you bring to Minot. Obviously, you get to now see some of the actions that you've taken go into law. Some of the things, speed limit changes, window tinting, property tax. There's just this myriad of stuff that you guys cover in this short span, really. You guys have 80 days every 2 years. What are a few of the bills that you are most excited about getting passed?
Well, I tell you, what I would describe as a sleeper bill that was there at the beginning of the session, but it didn't get much discussion. But it's turning out to be a very potent piece of legislation that I think has improved quality education without spending any money.
Okay.
And that was the bill we considered and passed to ban cell phones from bell to bell in K-12 education systems across the state. Mm-hmm. And we really hadn't given it a lot of attention or time at the start. And when we introduced it, there was some pushback, not significant pushback, because, doing something like that involves potentially invading the province of the school boards because it's regarded as a local decision. There were individuals that felt, well, maybe we should study this issue and see what the legislation should look like. And at some point early on in the session, we looked around, we had conversations with the governor's office and just decided, we don't need to study this. Several states had banned cell phones in the school classrooms. And so we said, let's go ahead and do this. This is the right thing to do for our education system. And I've been very pleasantly surprised, as have other legislators, that it's overwhelmingly a positive response, and they think it's making an improvement into the quality of education without spending any money.
Right. And
we've heard from administrators, from teachers who say the students are more attentive. We've heard from students that say, it's not a big deal.
That's incredible.
Yeah. The administrators say, "Hey, there's less drama."
Right.
So it's really one of those bills going into the session. It didn't have the spotlight like tax relief, but it sure is making an impact.
Yeah. So one thing you mentioned in there is there was talk about potentially a study, and so talking about that for a minute, we'll round back to maybe a couple more bills that you were excited about or are happy about now. But it seems like there's a theory, we'll call it that, that when things turn into when somebody doesn't want something to pass, it turns into a study.
Yes.
Do you feel like on your side of the process that's actually there's actually like roots to that theory, or is that just something that people say because they get upset because legislature didn't take action that they wanted?
Yeah, the legislative process is it's a formalized process, but it's conducted by 141 individuals, all of whom have feelings, and they have friendships and collegiality. Yep. And so sometimes if you're a legislator, Jonathan, and you introduce a bill and we don't think your bill is a very good idea, we might say, well, maybe we should, instead of killing the bill outright, we'd say, well, let's study this because it's got some merit, but we're not sure we want to go forward with it.
Right.
So we might say, let's study it. And by study it, we say, we'll think about studying it.
Okay.
And then that bill gets turned into a discretionary study. And at the end of the session, legislative management decides whether it's even worth studying.
I see. Very good. Very good. So going back to couple more bills. Cell phone ban, bell-to-bell cell phone ban. What's maybe one more bill that you were pretty excited that you saw passed?
Well, I would say, of course, the property tax relief, putting the caps in place. I know that's got mixed reviews around the state, but I really support that because although there are some political subdivisions that, again, say, hey, this is a local control issue, we as a state, have heard from too many property taxpayers from around the state to say, hey, this is what we want.
Right.
We finally galvanized enough public support to say, it is important that local political subdivisions have autonomy and the ability to govern, but at the same time, there came a point in time where we just decided, we've got to do something because taxes just keep going up at rates that were well above the inflationary level.
Right. No, that makes sense, and that's something that we'll talk about more in depth.
Okay.
When you're the majority leader, so you get to have a direct input on the process that these bills go through, and you kind of mentioned the process that happens when a bill turns over into a study. How do you decide, and I'm sure there's committee, and it's not a single person here, but how do you decide or are involved with the process to see which bills get prioritized or fast-tracked? Just break down that process a little bit more.
Okay. Well, after, let's break down the numbers.
Yeah.
Let's just use 900 because that's a pretty reliable number. There'll be, in any given legislative session, there's approximately 900 bills that are introduced in both the House and the Senate. I mean, between the two of them, 900. The Senate's amount will be about 350 bills.
Okay.
I look at every one of them as soon as they get dropped in what I call the hopper, which is after you, the legislator, signed off on it, it looks okay to you, you're happy with it as a draft, you drop it in the hopper.
Yeah.
It then comes to me, and I will review it with the Assistant Majority Leader, Senator Klein from Pheasanton, and together we will try to make a decision, even with the Senate Secretary, where does the bill go? Which policy committee is best able to understand and deal with this bill?
Yeah.
And that, it's based on whatever the subject matter is of the bill, it'll go to that committee. If it's something to do with, individual rights, for example, likely to go to Judiciary.
Okay.
If it's something that wants to spend money, it'll go to Appropriations. So most of those bills are, of the 350 or 400 that are in the Senate, they fall into pretty clearly established subject matter where it's pretty easy to decide. There's probably 20 or 30 that it could go to any number of committees, and then we'll start looking at, okay, what's the workload of these various committees? How many bills do they already have in? How many do they have to kick out? And based on their workload, we might make a decision based on which committee to assign them to. Makes
sense. So then you have something, and we saw it this year play out with the property tax 1176, and it got deemed the governor's bill. And the legislator that was working on was like, hey, I put a lot of work into this. This isn't just the governor's idea here. That's getting. How do you guys balance that then? And this is more on an individual legislator, their process of when the governor does, hey, there's this direction that I want. How close, for better or for worse, is that working relationship with a governor's office on creating a bill? Are bills created in tandem with the governor's office, or is there a pretty good separation? For better or for worse, I don't even know if there's something wrong with that.
Yeah, well, the Governor Armstrong, and I think every governor they come into a session. I mean, they sit down with individual legislators. Right. They sit down with leadership and say, these, at least I try to do it. I've done it with Governor Burgum.
Yeah.
I've tried to do it with Governor Armstrong, where we sit down and have a candid discussion of what is important to the governor and what is important to the legislature. Yep. And I think a priority for Governor Armstrong was property tax relief, which included caps. And so, both the legislature and the governor were synchronized on that issue. And it happens with a lot of issues, but they're two independent branches. But of course, it's not. Gee, I've got to have this particular policy,
right?
And because obviously the governor, unless it passes both the House and Senate, the governor will never see that policy.
Yep.
So it's mostly collaboration.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes sense. All right. So there was something that happened in this session, and this is kind of a unique thing. So much that it sounds like there may be legislation that pops up to address it, but there is a special session on the horizon. Some thought that should have been one after that veto that happened by the governor's office, where they just had a line item veto, but they accidentally vetoed more than what they wanted, is basically what we've heard.
Right.
They had a memo with it that didn't address everything that was vetoed and kind of proving it. So there was this idea that you could go determine intent and stuff like that. Do you feel like that is a good process, or for you on the legislative side, would you like to see that come back to the chamber so you guys can override that the veto that we didn't even want vetoed? Like, what's your thinking on that on your side of the?
Well, yeah, Jonathan, we have a interim committee called the Legislative Procedures and Arrangements, and they have drafted a bill for the next legislative session, which clarifies and tries to eliminate the confusion that happened from the last veto.
Okay.
And that confusion arises when the governor, under the Constitution, has to provide a veto message. Mm-hmm. And the veto message takes the form of a piece of correspondence. Yeah. And it says, I'm vetoing this particular bill or this particular, quote, item out of a appropriations bill, for these reasons. Yep. But along with that, the governor is constitutionally obligated to return to the House of Origin the vetoed bill or vetoed item. Mm-hmm. And that has always happened as well. And in the returning the vetoed bill, that is not, it's not vetoed in total, it's just a portion of it is the so-called item within the bill. Yep. The governor has traditionally used markings to put a box and an X over what was vetoed.
Makes sense.
And what happened in this past session is that for one of the governor's bills that he vetoed an item within a bill, within a spending bill, the language that he in his correspondence did not appear to match what had been crossed out. Yeah. So we have a draft bill in place that says, hey, if there is a conflict between the correspondence and the actual vetoed item, whatever the governor X's out, that will determine what is actually vetoed.
Oh, that makes sense. Very good. All right, so let's talk property tax. We have other stuff we'll talk about the future of North Dakota and stuff like that, but let's talk property tax for a minute. Okay. So obviously, pretty big property tax relief, I think, is what it's been considered, that came out of the legislature this year. There was a substantial primary tax credit, around $1,600 that's given out, and then taxing authorities at 3%. Do you feel like there was a lot of paths that could have been taken? There's a lot of options on the table. Do you feel like the legislature did find the best path forward?
I think so. And I know we were talking before we got started here today about it's kind of interesting to see how political subdivisions across the state are dealing with this new law. Yep. And I'm thinking it's been a pretty good response because I think there's an acknowledgement by most political subdivisions that yes, we need to control and keep our property taxes at 3%. Mm-hmm. And for those who are still feeling that their budgets are too severely constrained by that 3% cap, I think they're finding other sources of revenue. Yeah. Which in most cases I think is fine, but in some cases I'm not so sure. Right. Because the root issue for the property tax caps. The root issue was to look at homeowners who are on those fixed incomes or low incomes, and not letting them be sort of priced out of their homes because property taxes are going up at a faster rate than, let's say, their Social Security COLAs, their cost of living increases. And so that was one of the fundamental problems we tried to address, Jonathan.
I see.
So, I mean, if a political subdivision says, hey, we're capped at 3% of property taxes, but we can raise the water fees or the garbage fees or those things, that's not solving the problem.
Right.
Whereas, if they want to, let's say, have another half-cent sales tax, that's a different issue because while there's a lot of overlap between primary residence holders and people who pay sales tax in that city, that fixed income primary residence owner is somewhat protected because, if they go buy groceries, they're not going to be subject to that higher sales tax. If they go to the gas pump, which they have to do, they're not going to be subject to that higher sales tax. So I think there are ways that particularly cities can live within their means and get additional revenues out there without exacerbating the problem of that primary residence owner.
So you feel like the 3% cap is probably, there's been a lot of talk about it, like it needs to be increased, it needs to be whatever, and I've even said stuff like that. You feel like that's probably a solid number. It may be looked at, but you feel like that's pretty close to where it should be at.
Yes, I do.
Yeah,
I do. And that, why 3%? Well, we know where inflation has been. We know that the U.S. Federal Reserve has tried to bring inflation down to 2%. I don't think they're quite there yet.
Right.
But if you look at our political subdivisions, over 60%, most political subdivisions, over 60% of their expenses are for salaries, wages, and benefits for their employees.
Yeah.
And if they're able to provide, that those increases in the 2 to 3%, and inflation stays there, they're being kept whole. So it seems like that 3% is a reasonable figure for at least the short term.
Right.
And by that I mean the next 2 years.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so with that, there's also the other side of it, which is the $1,600 primary tax credit. And there's this idea that perhaps over the next 10 years or so, and it's not set in stone, but there's a chance that credit would increase to the point of being 100%. How do you feel about that path being taken as well?
Well, I wouldn't support that at all.
Okay.
People who are receiving services, which property taxes go to pay for services, the people who are receiving those services should pay for them.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean the state can't step in because we have the legacy fund to help out.
Right.
But to say that it's going to be, you're never going to have to pay any property taxes, what that tells me is that people support the state of North Dakota coming in and paying for all the local services, whether it's the police department, the fire department, the snow removal, the water. No, that's I don't think that's appropriate.
Yeah. So, and that makes sense. So, and this isn't necessarily in my intended questions, but you bring up a really good point, and so I want to theorize with you, if you'd allow.
Sure.
What's interesting about property tax is it says that we don't care about the amount of services that you use. If you have $1 million house, we're going to charge you this much in property taxes. Whereas if you have a $300,000 house, we're going to charge you this much in property taxes. Even though the $1 million house, it's just you and your wife have a lot of property, you don't really even use that much services. You just have a nice house because you've lived a good life, and whatever. The $300,000, you got 5 kids, and the police are called once a month because your kid actually accidentally dials 911, and you're using services whether you want to or not.
Right.
Just random examples here. Okay, but it's not in proportion. Would you be at all a proponent of switching the valuation then, where it wasn't based, where property taxes was still there, but it was more fee-based rather than based off the value of the home?
Yeah, I would certainly be willing to take a look at that. But one of the things in one of your examples that I would remind people of is, you don't get charged for police services for the one time that they get called to your house.
1,000%
You get charged for the fact that they're there to respond at any time.
Right.
24/7, 7 days a week. And so that's what we have to pay for, just like the fire protection.
Yep.
It's not you may never have a fire in your house, or you may never be in a catastrophic motor vehicle accident where the fire needs to be called out there, but you have to pay for that, for their readiness to respond to you or to anybody else.
Right.
And so I think that sometimes that's lost on people. But I certainly get the idea that what you're talking about is, hey, the person in the $1 million house is paying 3 times as much in property taxes as the person in the $300,000 house, and likely not getting
3 times more services.
Right.
Understood. For sure. Yeah. All right. So going back to the current process that we have, which is the $1,600 property tax credit, the 3% cap, and we're seeing budgets come in. And probably the biggest example of really cutting that we've seen and tightness that we've seen is in our Ward County. They already had a fairly conservative budget, and they felt a lot of pressure. And I'm sure you've heard about their process. I'm sure somebody's talked to you about it. And one of the things that was at one point on the chopping block was the juvenile detention center. Of course, what they are encountering is you have your pay increases, but they also have, as we've all seen, these substantial increases in insurance and stuff like that, which is completely resetting budgets for them. So if perhaps in the next 3-4 years, this cap stays in place and something like the juvenile detention center does finally hit the chopping block where we're going to have to cut that to stay within our cap. And for this one, it's a regional deal. Do you see, and that just being an example, I'm sure there's other examples throughout the state, but services like that are regional services. It's not just the city's fire or the county's sheriff's office. It's a regional service. Do you see stuff like that potentially falling into the state's budget where they either pay for it, it becomes a state service, or they probably more in a better way provide some funding to the taxing authorities to provide those regional services?
Yeah, I just what you said. I see the state stepping in to not only help with those regional governmental authorities, but maybe even to incent consolidation. Mm-hmm. You know, the state did that with school districts many years ago, where on the one hand, you don't necessarily want to close down a school district because it often is the identity and the key part of any small community. Right. But at the same time, the efficiencies of having 4 or 5 or a small number of students in a classroom just doesn't make economic sense. So you have to have some way of incenting that consolidation, and I could see the state doing that. Absolutely. With something like a regional juvenile facility. Yeah.
So just to finish off here, well, actually, I'll ask one more question. This one isn't a very nice question. Okay, this is a question that I think it's been asked before, and it's not one that people really love. And I'll call it the $1 billion question. Yeah. I'm not being fair to you now. Yeah.
Get a $1 billion question. Okay.
Get a drink of water for this one. So basically, local taxing authorities get the 3% cap. The state budget's at $20 billion in the biennium, right?
Sure.
Is there ever a day where we see a cap go on the state budget as well?
I would love to support a cap. My colleague, Representative Wolf, did introduce such a bill, and I thought I would love to see that.
Really? Okay.
Yes. Because I'm of the view that, our surpluses that we've been enjoying for the past several sessions are not going to continue indefinitely. Yeah. So what's wrong with the state capping its expenditures? That would force us to make the hard decisions we need to make. Mm-hmm. I've got an alternative to that I've pushed the past 2 sessions, which is we would not borrow, we would not bond, because we have these surpluses.
Yeah.
And yet we have, the last session, we had approximately $2 billion surplus, but yet legislators wanted to spend much more than that.
Yeah.
And so I just thought if we could avoid borrowing money, we would force us upon ourselves to make those priority decisions.
Yeah.
And that's what a cap does. It
Right.
forces you to make hard decisions. And, you know, sometimes elected officials chafe at that idea that, this cap.
Right.
But it can be a component of good fiscally sound government.
Well, to be fair to that point, we've heard feedback of course, you have the negative feedback that comes with that, and those conversations. But specifically, we've heard the 3% cap specifically has forced us to look through our budget and go with a fine-tooth comb and find stuff that we actually don't need that have just been sitting there that we're like, yeah, it's fine. It's not. It's $200,000, which state budget, that's not that much. But for a local budget, that can be, those add up fast. And so it's forced that. And I think that's a good thing. Okay. That's really good input there on potentially a state cap. So I'll finish out property tax with this. Do you feel we at the $1,600 primary tax credit, we're at 3% cap. Do you feel like that's basically the standard that we should expect going forward? Maybe there's some variations to it, but generally speaking.
I think it's if you're asking in the short term, let's say the next biennium,
right?
I think that'll find that it'll be sustained through the next session. Yeah. The $1,600 might be increased a little bit. It'll certainly depend on the performance of the legacy fund.
Right.
But clearly, we're not going to take all the legacy fund earnings and dedicate them to this property tax relief project.
Yeah.
But the legacy fund keeps the principal balance keeps increasing.
Right.
And so that means there's more earnings, which means a portion of that could be available to increase that.
Right. Makes sense. I want to talk about the future of North Dakota and some of the things that investing, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Before we jump there, just briefly, I want to talk about commerce and some of the stuff that's gone there. There was a performance audit that went there. Recently, there was a lawsuit that was filed by someone in the state of North Dakota against several defendants, individuals who currently or formerly worked for the state of North Dakota. And the state made the decision to go ahead and defend these individuals. Sure. Kind of an interesting move that some weren't sure of how that was going to work out. And from a general framework, have you seen, you've worked with the Attorney General's office for many years, I'm sure. Is this something you've seen before where the state has stepped into a suit that they weren't necessarily party to when it was filed to choose to defend those individuals? Yeah,
well, you see, I'm a lawyer and I'm involved in litigation, have been for 38 years. So you do see from time to time plaintiffs will make a strategic decision to say, hey, this happened to me while I was engaging with the state, but I'm not going to sue these state employees in their capacity as representatives of the Commerce Department. I'm going to sue them individually. But it's for things that they did while they were working for Commerce. Okay. And so if that's the case, I think the state has an obligation to defend those individuals. And I support that.
Makes sense.
But I know there are strategic reasons for somebody to only want to sue them in their individual capacities. I get that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so with Commerce as a whole, they've received a lot of attention over the past little bit, especially in the last legislative session. You could go into the dealings. There's somebody that has a podcast out right now, the $740,000 question, which is referring to grants that were given to filmmakers, and it felt like all these grants went to one company and other companies didn't have a fair chance. And so not specifically because of that, but because of other things, there was a performance audit of the North Dakota Development Fund. How closely are these funds, are these audits, like what do you guys see at the legislature when you see these things going on? What are you guys looking for, and how closely are these things actually being managed?
Well, that's a good question, Jonathan. We, Senator Kent Weston at the beginning of the session, introduced legislation to have an audit of the Department of Commerce, and I've been supportive of that.
Yeah.
We have got an audit now of the development fund, because that's a fund that is out of the public spotlight, but it has a great deal of discretion to borrow money to applicants, and we don't often see what happens.
Yeah.
And so I fully support a rigorous audit of the Commerce Department, and the reason is not because because people there aren't doing their job.
Right.
It's because the Commerce Department, we appropriate a lot of dollars to them that are discretionary dollars, meaning they can be spent in a way that is within the discretion of the Commerce Department, because they establish guidelines for grants and for low-interest loans. And we need to be monitoring that and making sure that those programs are administered in a fair way. And the one that you mentioned, the grant of I think it was $700,000 to a film production company without what some regarded as a reasonable opportunity to make application. I saw that and I was troubled by that. So that is in part why I think when you have an agency with considerable amounts of discretionary dollars, they are the ones that should attract the most oversight from the state auditor and from the legislature.
Right. And of course, one of the neat things about North Dakota is that there's not a full-time legislature. I think that's getting to the place where that's being debated if it's still neat. But that makes it difficult for the legislature to provide direct oversight over these things.
Right.
And so is there a process that you guys have for that to help provide some of that oversight in the interim when you guys aren't necessarily in Bismarck all the time?
Great question. We are fundamentally overhauling legislative council. We are taking some positions from executive branch agencies to put in legislative council to have what we call a performance audit of executive branch agency programs and spending. It's something we learned in the last interim, where, as you point out, we're a citizen legislature. We do our business once every 2 years, and then we go home and we go back to our day jobs.
Yep.
But part of the constitutional responsibility of the legislature is to provide oversight of the executive branch and its spending.
Yeah.
And so what we've done is we've hired some folks who that will be their job, which is to evaluate programs. How is the money being spent? Is it being spent as envisioned in the legislation that authorized the spending? Yeah. And again, I'm sure those performance folks will be focused on, like we talked about before, the Commerce Department, which has a lot of discretionary spending.
No, that's very good. So you mentioned, or we both mentioned, that it's a part-time legislature, but it seems like there's a lot of work that still goes on in the interim. Right. What is that schedule kind of like? I mean, schedule might be too specific, but how much work are you actually doing in the interim?
Well, my situation is unique. I'm doing a lot because in leadership, there's just a lot of things to do. But I'd say for most legislators, they're on approximately two interim committees, and those interim committees might meet 4 or 5 times during the interim. Yeah. So there's 10 meetings. If you're on the appropriations process, the budget process, those folks are meeting quarterly. Okay. And so that work goes on, but there's all kinds of other committees and other processes where legislators are involved. To me, the most important thing for legislators to do in the interim is to educate. Okay. Find out what other states are doing. Yeah. Find out what's working and what's not working. And we do that by authorizing legislators to go to conferences where they can meet with their colleagues from other states. We have two organizations, the Council on State Governments and another one called NCSL. That's an acronym, but they're both basically national organizations that cater to state legislators to tell them what's going on in the other states. To me, that's a really important function for legislators.
Absolutely. Are there any priorities that you see coming out of the committees, perhaps that will present themselves in the next session? Are there any priorities that you see being worked on?
Well, there are a number of priorities. I would say I am continue to be focused on value-added agriculture for the state. I mean, agriculture is obviously a strength of North Dakota. But, we've fallen behind, for example, in animal agriculture. We used to be on par with Minnesota and South Dakota when it came to dairy operations, swine operations, and we've fallen way behind, and there's no reason for that.
Right.
And with the with the new ethanol and the new soybean facilities, there's tremendous opportunities for access to cheap, affordable feed for a dairy or swine operation.
Right.
And so to me, that's a priority.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's an interesting thing because that's a industry that's been a part of North Dakota for a while. And then we had oil come into the game of industries that North Dakota provided. And it seems like after oil, North Dakota chose over the last few years to take a very active approach into finding emerging industries. There's been investment that's went into crypto mining, creating facilities that would be able to produce that. There's been in Ellendale, this AI data center, which is just this incredible center that's going on in the middle of, respectfully, nowhere, North Dakota, which is interesting. I know it's close to whatever, but it's really interesting how that completely changes the shape of an area. Well, that's what I mean by that. And then there's now coming out of the last session, there was a study about nuclear energy research, and potentially this is another industry that North Dakota would look at down the line. Seems like there's this continual investment in that. Do you see this as a good thing? Like because there's, I think, two sides to this. I think it's neat to see the investment going on because we're trying to take an oil industry that is volatile, that you never know where it's going to be in the next 20 years, and find another industry that we can invest in to keep the sustainability of something like the Legacy Fund, to keep that growing. But if we're looking at every emerging industry, we're going to have a few misses as well. What's your viewpoint and approach on that?
Well, my viewpoint, Jonathan, is that we should leverage the natural resources that we have, both in the ag industry and in the energy industry.
Okay.
And I mentioned the soybean crushing facilities.
Right.
We have two of them now, and maybe more.
Yeah.
One in Castleton.
Right.
One in Spiritwood. Tremendous synergy for the North Dakota economy, right? Because look at what's going on for our soybean farmers now.
Yeah.
They're caught in this global politics of tariffs with China, and China doesn't want to buy our soybeans. Well, you build a soybean processing facility in Castleton, and you build one in Spiritwood, and both of those plants can take about 1/3 of the soybeans that our producers grow today and take them here in North Dakota, value add them, produce the products that they produce, and the byproducts, and keep all of that wealth here in North Dakota. So to me, that's just a logical thing, a good business decision for the state of North Dakota to encourage is value-added agriculture. Soybean processing plants, ethanol processing plants. Again, North Dakota wasn't always a corn-growing state, but with these ethanol plants, it's made it more viable.
Right.
And in the energy industry, I'd say the same thing, right? So for a lot of years, most of the oil producers were flaring all the gas, and it was regarded as a waste product. And the federal government started making that more difficult to do. And all of a sudden now we have a viable use for this excess natural gas, because it can be used to generate electricity, right?
Right.
And who needs electricity? Data centers. AI is a large consumer of electricity.
Yeah.
And so it's leveraging our natural resource, natural gas, and using it for an industry that, is frankly drawn to North Dakota because we have, a lot of advantages, including low-cost energy.
Well, it's amazing what can come out of constraint.
Right.
We're seeing that with the budgets, and you're addressing that with the constraints of the government on that excess gas and stuff.
Right.
It's interesting what can come out of that. All right. Well, we're coming to a close. It's been a good interview. I'm going to talk about the future of North Dakota for a minute.
Okay.
Two things. One, term limits. It's sad. It's happening. But you guys have legislation or a measure that's going to come out on the ballot that's potentially change how that term limits is written, where it'd be 16 years for a legislature in either chamber. They could serve 16 years as a whole. Do you feel like that is a positive step and maybe something where the legislature and the people could potentially come to an agreement on how term limits would actually be in place in North Dakota? Or what's your viewpoint of that?
My viewpoint is I support the measure. The original term limits that was passed was 16 years if you jump from one house to the other. The one that is likely to go on the ballot is 16 years. You don't have to to jump from the House to the Senate or from the Senate to the House. And frankly, I wasn't sure why the drafters of the original measure made that decision that says, okay, you can serve 8 here, and then you can serve another 8 if you jump over.
Yeah.
I'm still puzzled by that. The thing that the overarching issue for me is, again, as a citizen legislature, I think, if we just go with an 8 years, it's just too short a time for us to have good legislators. And people always think, well, we don't want this politics. But what I think is really not always appreciated is that we talked about 900 bills. I will tell you this: of the 900 bills, there's probably 200 of them that involve politics and ideology.
Right.
The vast majority of bills are about trying to craft good legislation. Do we need to change the law? Do we need a new law? It's not partisan at all.
Yep.
And in order to be a good legislator and make good laws, you do actually need to have knowledge and experience.
Right.
And that's true. Legislators are not different than a lot of other jobs where, if you're practicing law, if you're a journalist, you get better as you get experience.
Right.
And when you're a part-time legislator, like we are, the idea that you get to serve 2 to 3 sessions for 4 months and then you're done, to me, it's simply just too short of a period of time. It's not like full-time legislators we have in Congress.
Yeah, and with that, it's part-time, but your schedule isn't part-time when it comes to you spend a lot of hours in Bismarck and a lot of hours working on that. And of course, like you mentioned, you're in leadership, so it's a little bit different, but definitely. So term limits probably in the future in some way or another, but as a whole, the direction that North Dakota is heading, the actions that we're taking at this last session, and where we're going to be going in the future, are we on a good path? What is it? What does the future look like?
Jonathan, I think we're on a great path.
Yeah.
We are on a great path because one of the things I love about North Dakota is that we're small enough and we have the resources that we can control and shape our own destiny. Mm-hmm. You mentioned the center down in Ellendale. It came out of nowhere, but it came with a lot of support from the state because we thought it made sense.
Yeah.
And so you have, like the Bank of North Dakota can help with housing because housing was a constraint.
Yeah.
You had the local government was able to help. You have the low cost energy, which is a byproduct of the fact that we are an energy powerhouse and we can't possibly consume all the power that we generate in this state.
Right.
So what I like about North Dakota and why I think we're on such a great path is we have the ability to control our own destiny, and that's not true of a lot of the larger, more populous states in the nation.
Very exciting.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you coming on today. It's been a great conversation.
Thanks for having me, Jonathan. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you to everyone that did watch this video. This is Minot Matters here at the Dakota. Be sure to like and subscribe. Join the Dakotan community. We'll have more great conversations coming your way. But for now, have a great rest of your day.